everybody, it's Deb and Gino, and I wanted to do a quick video answer to a question that had come into the My Wired Style email. Here's what the question was. Is there a difference between D's and I's and S's and C's depending on what region of the country they're from? I absolutely love the question because even if you think of it in more global terms, think of it, is there a difference in different regions of the world on how D's and I's and S's and C's operate? So here goes. First of all, let's talk about globally. I have been really blessed to be able to work in, oh my gosh, 14, 15 different countries or so, and establishing teams there. Now, what I love about that experience is I had the unique ability to cross different cultures, to be able to learn how people are wired with their strengths in different cultures, in different countries, and to see, is there really a difference? So let's get started with the answer. So if somebody's very D-wired, let's use D-wired as an example here, because while they have the strengths of being strong-willed and decisive and very assertive, very much in command and control, well, when they're out of control, they can really be angry. I mean, let's face it. And anger, as it's expressed, for example, may be a little different cross-culturally. So, for example, I grew up in New York City, and I still live in New York today. So in New York, for example, the ability for someone to tolerate anger becomes a little bit tougher, a little bit stronger, a little bit higher, if you will. I think really because of our life experience. Our life experience is, if you've had to sort of shoo a couple of taxi drivers away from your legs as they're trying to turn when you're crossing the street a few times in your life, whether you're a D or I or S or C, your capacity to handle that experience becomes a little bit higher. Now let's contrast that with, let's say, an opposite side of the world over in Asia, where typically when you think of people that are from Asia, you think of people that are very soft-spoken, very quiet, very demure, very reserved. Well, that's not always the case, because here's the thing. D's and I's and S's and C's are the very much similar percentages across all areas of the globe. So whether you're talking about folks in the US or folks in Japan or folks in Italy or folks in Scandinavia, the percentage of D's, I's, S's, and C's are very similar. And just as that, it's very similar how they express their strengths and their weaknesses. The only difference is what the culture will accept. Let me give you a few examples. Now, you're seeing a picture here of hockey. Hockey's a great example. Hockey's a sport, although sometimes I think they should call it box hockey, because they seem to be boxing just as much as they're playing hockey. I mean, if you've ever watched a hockey game in any given period, you will see the sticks and the gloves thrown to the ice and fisticuffs, arising in the middle of the, ice rink there. And what I love about this example is if you contrast hockey with golf, for example, in golf, it is completely not heard of for people to throw down their clubs and suddenly engage in fisticuffs out on the course. I mean, no one gets to the 18th hole and decides that they're just going to, beat their opponent with their stick. It just doesn't happen. They may feel that way. They may think that way. They may want to do that, but it's not something that they do. I think the reason for that is the fact that in hockey, for example, it has become very culturally acceptable for, for folks to, beat each other up, to throw down their gloves and start fighting. Where in golf, it's not at all culturally acceptable. It's not something they do. As a matter of fact, in golf, it cracks me up how in golf, just recently they had the US Open. I was watching a part of it on TV, and I have to say, golf is not my favorite sport. I'm D-wired, so it's a little too slow for me. It's kind of like watching, I don't know, paint dry. But for those of you who golf, I'm sure it's a wonderful sport. I'm more into sports like basketball and tennis that are much more fast-paced. So, for example, when I was watching a piece of the US Open, I was seeing how if somebody's cell phone goes off, everybody, the crowd is aghast, like, they just stop for a moment in like pregnant pause because they can't believe that someone was so rude that they did not turn off their cell phone. When, of course, when you converse that with hockey, where rude is hardly the issue is more things like, I don't know, not bloodying somebody's nose, not breaking somebody's eye socket. It just seems like it's a big difference because in hockey, it's accepted. In golf, it's not. Let's look at tennis. Tennis is another great example. Tennis, back in its day, oh my gosh, it started what, back in the 1800s or so? Tennis was the gentleman's sport, right? It was people wearing all white, very neat, crisp, gentlemanly behavior, dressed up for the occasion. Even the people that attended the tennis matches dressed up for the occasion. I mean, it was really a big deal. I know that my husband and I, back in the 80s, we were really, really lucky here in New York to have front row box seats at the U.S. Open in Forest Hills, New York back then. And we were spoiled rotten because that was the very first tennis tournament that we were ever at. So anything paled in comparison to those seats and that venue. And we watched John McEnroe and Jimmy Connor play tennis, and we were mesmerized. Now, what I love about tennis is in its roots, in its heyday, like I said, it was this very gentlemanly sport. So whether you're a man or a woman who played it, you wore white, you looked very nice, you were very conservative, you were very polite to your opponent, as opposed to a few years later in the 1980s, late 70s, and early 80s, when somebody like John McEnroe hit the tennis courts. What he did was he stretched the boundary of what was culturally acceptable. So think of it in terms of behavior, DIS and Cs. What happens is some cultures, their boundary of what's acceptable is a little bit stretched. It's a little bit different. It morphs into a different shape. So I know in New York, for example, a lot of people will say, oh my gosh, New Yorkers we have this really bad sort of reputation as being mean people, and I think some of us are. I know I can be mean on occasion, and I'm sure other people can too, but we are not always mean people. We are not this sort of mean, miserable bunch that's going around, beating each other up all the time, that's for sure. But culturally, we maybe have a higher tolerance or a higher capacity to handle misbehavior, probably because we've seen more, we've experienced more. It's funny, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City. I'm the oldest of 7 children in an Italian household. So mom and dad slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. We had a boys' bedroom and a girls' bedroom and 1 bathroom. You learned at a really young age how to either navigate around people or how to just leave the house early so that this way you could use the bathroom somewhere else so you didn't have to get stuck online. Because culturally, that was what happened in our family. So my capacity for noise, my capacity for confusion, disorganization kind of got very high because I was growing up in an environment where it's impossible to wrangle 7 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment and make it seem like it is the Sound of Music, they blow the whistle and everybody snaps to order. It just doesn't happen that way. So think of it again. Let's go back to tennis. So John McEnroe absolutely stretched the boundary of what was culturally acceptable in tennis. So somebody's very de-wired. If you look at some of the weaknesses here, they're high-strung, they're argumentative, they dislike routine, they're a workaholic, they tend to work alone. That crosses all cultures. How it's exhibited is slightly different. Look at the weaknesses of I-wired folks. Difficulty with follow-through, inattentive to detail, forgetful, more concerned with popularity than with results. Think of it in terms of if somebody's easily distracted, sort of they suffer from that shiny object syndrome. If somebody is easily distracted, it doesn't matter whether they are sitting in the middle of Kyoto, Japan, or in the middle of Mobile, Alabama. They are distracted, period, end of story, right? Let's look at S-wired people. Their weaknesses, at times they can lack self-motivation. They can take a long time to adjust to change, be very sensitive, have difficulty establishing priorities, and avoids confrontations pretty much at all costs. That's the same no matter what culture it is. Maybe to what degree it's accepted or not accepted is slightly different. And the same thing with C-wired folks that have the weaknesses of maybe getting bogged down in too many details, bound by too many procedures and methods, and way too much analysis paralysis, and sometimes not enough action. So whether you are sitting in the middle of Sacramento, California, or, you know, I don't know, Des Moines, Iowa, you're still going to suffer from these challenges if you're C-wired. The difference is what is culturally acceptable. You know, it's funny, growing up in a Italian household, what I could tell you is that we're a loud group of people. We talk loud. We do things in a very loud way. There's just no getting around it. And sometimes I crack up when I watch home movies and I see us in action and I think, oh my word, I hope this never hits YouTube, because if somebody sees this, they'll just think we're just obnoxious, and maybe at times we are. But our culture accepts loudness, accepts a lot of activity, accepts a lot of sort of in your face fun moments as well as the crummy moments too. So what I'm saying is that whether or not somebody is D, an I, or S, or a C, irrespective of their locale in this country or any other country, the strengths and weaknesses are the same. But what does change is whether or not that culture accepts it, and to what degree. That is the only difference. So shoot us any questions you have. You can send us an email at podcast@mywiredstyle.com. I hope you have found this helpful. I know I absolutely just loved the question. I hope you guys are having a great week. Bye-bye.